Checking results is not awareness. It is interference. This is the truth most people avoid because it sounds uncomfortable. Yet, it explains why so many processes stall right before completion. The moment you start checking, something shifts. Not outside of you. Inside the system, you are running. Checking is not neutral. It is an action. And every action carries intention. When you check, you are not observing calmly. You are asking a question loaded with pressure. Is it working? Is it happening yet? Did I do it right? That question does not come from clarity. It comes from uncertainty disguised as responsibility. You may call it awareness, but the system reads it as doubt. Awareness holds space. Interference demands proof. These two states feel similar on the surface. Both involve attention. Both involve focus. But their frequencies are completely different. Awareness says, I am here. Interference says, convince me. The system responds accordingly. Every complex process requires a phase of invisibility, a phase where structure is forming but results are not yet visible. This phase is fragile, not weak. Fragile. It is like concrete that has been poured but not yet cured. Touch it too early and you do not speed it up. You ruin its integrity. Checking results is the same touch. Each time you check, you collapse the space where reorganization is happening. You force the system to respond before it has stabilized. You ask it to become final before it is finished becoming coherent. Nothing breaks loudly. The system simply slows, then stalls, then waits for you to stop interfering. Most people misread this pause as failure. They try harder. They check more often. They tighten their grip. This creates more interference. The paradox is simple. The more you check, the less movement you see. The less movement you see, the more you check. This loop does not exist because you lack power. It exists because you do not understand timing. Awareness respects timing. Interference ignores it. True awareness does not ask, where am I now? It knows where it is without demanding confirmation. Interference is impatience, wearing the mask of intelligence. Many people believe that staying alert means staying vigilant. Constant monitoring, constant évaluation, constant measurement. But systems that require emergence do not thrive under surveillance. They require trust in the process once initiation has occurred. This does not mean blindness. It means restraint. Restraint is not passive. It is an active choice to not interrupt. When you stop checking, something counterintuitive happens. The system regains coherence. Signals align. Momentum resumes. Not because you did something more, but because you finally stopped doing the one thing that was blocking it. Interference always comes disguised as care, as discipline, as awareness. That is why it is so hard to notice. You think you are being responsible, but responsibility in this context is knowing when to step back. There is a difference between attention and pressure, between presence and control. Checking results is control, and control collapses processes that need space. The system is not confused. It is responding accurately to your signal. Every check sends the same message. I do not trust this yet. The system hears that and pauses, not to punish you, to stabilize itself against conflicting input. This is why progress often resumes only after you stop watching it. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped interfering. Awareness does not lean forward. It stays centered. Interference leans in and disrupts balance. Once you understand this distinction, behavior changes naturally. You do not need to force patience. You see why patience is required. You realize that checking was never helping. It was only satisfying anxiety, and anxiety has no place in systems that are still forming. The most disciplined move is silence. The most intelligent action is restraint. The most powerful signal is trust without monitoring. Checking results feels productive, but it is not. It is noise. And noise is the enemy of coherence. If something has been initiated correctly, it does not need constant validation. It needs uninterrupted space to complete itself. Awareness knows when to look away. Interference cannot. That is the difference. You are not standing still, but you are not moving forward either. There is motion inside you. Decisions, adjustments, effort, awareness, yet externally nothing locks in. You feel close, closer than ever before. So close that you start watching it, measuring it, checking signs, looking for confirmation. That is when the wait begins. Not heavy enough to stop you, just heavy enough to slow everything down. You wake up with the sense that something is about to shift. Then the day passes. Nothing arrives. The feeling repeats, soon becomes familiar, almost arrives, becomes a pattern. You tell yourself this is part of the process. That patience is required. That transformation is never instant. All of that is true, and still something feels off, because the slowness does not feel natural. It feels tense. The system feels tight, like something is being held too closely. Every time you look at it, it feels heavier. Every time you check, the distance increases. You start to notice a strange contradiction. The more aware you are, the less progress you feel. The more intentional you become, the less fluid everything seems. This is the moment most people misinterpret. They assume the answer is more effort, more focus, more monitoring, but the pattern does not respond to pressure. It responds to release. What you are experiencing is not resistance from the outside. It is friction created inside the process itself. This is what interference feels like from the inside. Not chaos, not collapse, but stagnation that looks almost complete. The system's not broken. It is overloaded. Overloaded with attention that is slightly misaligned. You are not watching from presence. You are watching from anticipation. Anticipation is subtle. It feels like hope, but it carries tension. Hope that leans forward becomes demand. And demand distorts timing. This is why everything feels delayed. Not denied, delayed. You are standing too close to something that needs space to resolve. Think about moments in your life when things finally clicked. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped hovering. Opportunities that arrived when you were focused elsewhere. Insights that landed when you were not searching. Connections that formed when you were no longer trying to make them happen. Those moments were not accidents. They followed the same principle. When you step back, coherence returned. Right now, you are caught in the opposite posture. Watching, waiting, checking. You call it readiness, but the system reads it as pressure. Pressure does not feel aggressive. It feels subtle, like holding your breath just a little. And just like holding your breath, it restricts flow. That heaviness you feel is not exhaustion. It is compression, energy that wants to move but cannot find clean space. The closer you get to the shift, the more tempting it becomes to observe it closely, to make sure you do not miss it, to confirm it is real. This is the trap. The final phase of many processes is the most sensitive to interference, because structure is forming but not yet visible. At this stage, observation does not stabilize, it destabilizes. That is why everything feels like it slows right before it locks in. Not because it is failing, but because it is being watched too closely. You are not imagining this pattern. You are living inside it. The feeling of almost there, the sense of hovering at the edge, the repeated pause. This is not bad luck. It is feedback. The system is telling you that your position inside it has shifted. You are no longer inside the process. You are standing just outside it, evaluating it. And systems do not complete themselves under evaluation. They complete themselves under coherence. This is why checking feels heavy, because each check pulls you slightly out of alignment. You lean forward, the system leans back. You search for signs. The system withdraws into silence, not as punishment, as protection. Protection from premature collapse. The pattern repeats because the signal repeats. Every time you feel close and then check, the loop resets. Soon becomes soon again. Almost arrives, becomes almost again. This is the signature of interference. Not loud failure, not dramatic loss. Just endless proximity without arrival. If this were a lack of effort, more effort would fix it, but it does not. If this were confusion, clarity would fix it. But clarity increases the pressure. That is how, this is not a knowledge problem. It is a positional one. You are standing in the wrong place relative to the process. Too close, too alert, too engaged at the wrong layer. Awareness at the wrong distance becomes noise. The solution is not to stop caring. It is to stop hovering, to allow the system to finish without supervision. This feels uncomfortable because it looks like doing less, but in reality, it is doing something very precise. It is choosing not to interfere at the most sensitive stage. Once you recognize this pattern, it cannot be unseen. You will notice how often progress resumes the moment attention relaxes, how things move the moment you stop checking, not because you gave up, but because you finally gave space. This moment you are in is not a dead end. It is a mirror. It is showing you exactly how interference feels before it becomes visible failure. And once you see it, you no longer need to repeat it. The system is waiting, not for more action, for less interruption. That is the shift you are standing in front of right now. Interference is not bad. It was never meant to be. Interference is simply a signal that does not belong to the same layer as the process it touches. That is all. No punishment, no failure, no moral weight. Just a mismatch. The system you are in is not finished. It is forming. Formation is not chaos. It is not confusion. It is an ordered phase that happens before structure becomes visible. During this phase, information moves internally. Connections reorganize. Parameters settle. Nothing is missing. Nothing is wrong. But this phase cannot tolerate demands for finality. And this is where interference appears, not as destruction, as incompatibility. You are asking a system that is still becoming to behave as if it is already complete. You are requesting proof from something that has not finished defining itself. That request does not speed things up. It introduces distortion. Imagine trying to read a sentence that is still being written. Each time you interrupt to ask if it is done, the writing stops, not because the sentence cannot be completed, but because the act of interruption breaks the flow required to finish it. Interference works the same way. It is not forceful. It is subtle. It arrives as a reasonable question asked at the wrong level. The system is operating in a pre-final state. You are communicating from a post-final expectation. These two layers do not speak the same language. When they meet, nothing dramatic happens. The system simply slows to protect coherence. Most people misinterpret this slowdown as resistance. They think something is blocking them, but nothing is blocking you. You are overlapping incompatible phases. Formation requires uncertainty. Completion requires certainty. You cannot demand certainty from a process that still depends on uncertainty to organize itself. This is why interference feels confusing. You are doing something that usually works in other contexts. Checking, verifying, evaluating incompleted systems. These actions create clarity. In forming systems, they create noise. The same behavior produces opposite effects depending on the phase. This is the distinction most people never learn. They treat all processes as if they should respond to the same type of attention. They expect early stages to behave like finished outcomes, and when they do not, frustration appears. But frustration is not the issue. Layer mismatches. The system is not asking for faith. It is asking for timing. Timing determines whether attention becomes alignment or interference. At the wrong time, even gentle attention destabilizes. Interference does not mean you are wrong. It means your signal belongs to a different stage. You are tuned to outcomes. The system is still tuning itself. This is why checking feels heavy. It is not emotional weight. It is structural resistance. The system is holding itself together against premature definition. Every time you ask for proof, the system must pause to maintain internal consistency. This pause is misread as stagnation. In reality, it is self-preservation. Interference is not negativity. It is feedback. It tells you that your awareness has jumped ahead of the process. You are standing at the finish line while the structure is still assembling. This is not impatience. It is misplacement. Awareness does not fail here. It simply needs repositioning. Instead of asking what has appeared, awareness must ask what is stabilizing. But most people do not ask that question. They ask for results. Results belong to a later layer, and when you demand results too early, the system cannot comply without compromising itself. So it does the only intelligent thing. It slows, not to punish you, to finish properly. Interference is often confused with self-sabotage, but self-sabotage is emotional. Interference is mechanical. It does not care how much you want something. It only responds to whether your signal matches the current phase. You could have perfect intentions and still interfere. You could be calm and still interfere, because this is not about emotion. It is about alignment. Alignment means your attention speaks the same language as the system you are in. Right now, the system speaks the language of formation. You are speaking the language of confirmation. These languages cannot merge without friction. That friction is what you feel as heaviness, delay, resistance. Once you understand this, the experience changes immediately. Not because the system finishes faster, but because you stop sending incompatible signals. You stop asking for completion from a process that needs space to remain unfinished. And in that space, coherence returns. Interference disappears not because you forced it away, but because you moved to the correct layer. You stopped talking to the system from the future. You met it where it actually is. This is the quiet intelligence of awareness. Not to observe everything at once, but to know which layer you are in. Interference only exists when awareness loses that distinction. And once you see it clearly, the system no longer feels blocked. It feels precise, unfinished, but precise. That is how you know it is working. Not by proof, by coherence. And coherence never rushes. It completes itself when no incompatible signals remain. Observation does not destroy a process. The intention behind observation does. This distinction changes everything. Two people can look at the same situation. One stabilizes it, the other collapses it. The difference is not in what they see, it is in why they are looking. Observation rooted in trust keeps the system open. Observation rooted in verification causes contraction. The system responds to the posture behind the gaze. When you observe with trust, you are present. You allow the process to continue unfolding without pressure. Your attention acts like a steady field. When you observe to check, you are not present. You are evaluating. You are measuring against an expectation. That expectation introduces tension. The system senses this immediately, not emotionally, structurally. You are no longer inside the process. You are standing outside it, asking for confirmation. This shift in position changes how the system behaves. Trust-based observation says stay as you are. Verification-based observation says prove yourself. The first creates stability. The second triggers defense. Most people do not realize when this shift happens. It feels subtle. You tell yourself you are simply being aware, but the body feels tight. The attention leans forward. That leaning is the signal. The moment you lean into check, you are no longer witnessing. You are testing. Testing demands response. Witnessing allows continuation. A system under test cannot remain fluid. It must freeze parts of itself to respond. That freeze is what you feel as slowing. This is why observation can act like a blade. Not because looking is dangerous, but because looking with doubt cuts continuity. You are not watching to understand. You are watching to make sure, and making sure always implies uncertainty. Uncertainty is not wrong, but it is incompatible with processes that require uninterrupted formation. Every time you check, you ask the system to step out of its natural rhythm and address your concern. It cannot do both at once. So it pause. This pause is not a flaw. It is intelligence. The system protects itself from premature definition. When observation carries trust, no protection is needed. The system remains open. When observation carries doubt, boundaries appear. This is not spiritual language. It is how complex systems preserve coherence. Trust creates space. Doubt compresses it. The difference is felt immediately. When you trust, the process feels lighter. Even if nothing visible changes, when you doubt, everything feels heavy. Even if you are close to completion, this heaviness is not emotional fatigue. It is structural contraction. You are squeezing the process with attention that is asking the wrong question. Instead of asking what is forming, you ask, is it done? That question pulls the system forward too soon. And like any structure pulled before it sets, it weakens. You may believe that watching closely helps you stay aligned, but alignment does not come from scrutiny. It comes from resonance. Resonance does not need to check. It already knows. This is why people often say things moved only when they stopped looking. Not because they stopped caring, but because their observation shifted from doubt to allowance. They stopped asking for reassurance. They allowed the system to complete itself without interrogation. The blade of observation is not in the eyes. It is in the motive. If you observe to feel safe, you introduce fear. If you observe to stay present, you introduce stability. The system reacts to these signals differently. Fear-based observation narrows possibilities. Presence-based observation holds them open. This is the knife edge you are walking. Most people think more awareness is always better, but awareness without trust becomes surveillance. And surveillance changes behavior, not because the system is fragile, but because it must now manage being watched. It diverts energy from formation to defense. That diversion is what you feel as stagnation. The more you watch to check, the more the system withdraws. The more you watch to witness, the more it flows. This is not metaphor. It is mechanics. The system is not responding to your thoughts. It is responding to your posture. Are you leaning in to catch failure? Or are you standing steady, allowing emergence? One posture slices, the other supports. Once you see this clearly, you stop blaming yourself. You stop trying to fix the process. You simply change how you look. You let your gaze soften. You observe without demand. And in that moment, the blade disappears. Observation returns to what it was meant to be. A stabilizing field, not a test, not a threat, just presence. And presence never kills a process. It allows it to finish in its own time. That is the difference between seeing and interfering. And once you feel it, you never confuse the two again. Doubt is the strongest form of interference. Not because it is loud, but because it is conditional. Doubt does not say, I do not believe. It says, show me the result, and then I will decide whether this can continue. That sentence carries an instruction. Exist only after proof. This instruction changes how any system responds. A system that is still forming cannot operate under conditional permission. It requires continuity. Doubt interrupts that continuity at the deepest level. This is why doubt is not neutral. It does not sit quietly in the background. It actively alters the signal you are sending. You may feel calm on the surface. You may even feel reasonable. But doubt does not need emotion to function. It operates through structure. When doubt appears, the system receives a clear message. Completion is being demanded before coherence has stabilized. In quantum terms, this is the command to collapse. Not collapse as punishment, collapse as response. The system is asked to resolve itself prematurely. So it locks into the smallest expression it can safely maintain. This is why doubt shrinks outcomes. Not because you did something wrong, but because the system chose stability over expansion. Doubt is often misunderstood as intelligence, as caution, as realism. But realism that demands proof too early becomes interference. It pulls the future into the present before the present is ready to hold it. Most people do not realize they are doubting. They believe they are simply checking. But checking driven by doubt carries an edge that says, if this does not show up soon, something is wrong. That edge is the signal. Doubt does not need words. It lives in posture. It lives in the way attention tightens, in the way you lean forward, waiting for confirmation. This posture does not feel aggressive. It feels alert, but alertness with expectation is pressure. And pressure changes behavior. When a system senses doubt, it does not argue. It does not reassure. It reduces risk. It chooses predictability. It closes possibilities. This is why doubt feels like stagnation rather than collapse. Nothing dramatic happens. Things simply stop opening. Opportunities narrow. Timing stretches. Movement slows. The system is not failing. It is obeying the safest interpretation of your signal. Doubt tells the system that uncertainty is not allowed. So the system removes uncertainty. It collapses options. This is not spiritual language. It is how systems manage threat. Conditional acceptance is a threat to ongoing formation. Doubt says you may continue only if you prove yourself. The system responds by limiting itself to what it can prove immediately. Anything that requires time disappears. This is why doubt is more damaging than fear. Fear can exist without control. Doubt demands control. Fear says, I am uncomfortable. Doubt says, resolve now. Resolve now is the most disruptive command you can issue during formation, because formation depends on unresolved states. You are not being punished when doubt slows things down. You are being mirrored. The system reflects your demand for certainty by removing potential. This reflection feels frustrating, but it is precise. The moment doubt relaxes, expansion returns. Not because the system forgives you, but because the instruction has changed. Unconditional allowance creates space. Conditional allowance closes it. Doubt is the condition. This is why telling yourself to believe harder never works. Belief forced against doubt creates conflict. The system receives mixed signals. One part says continue, another says stop until proven. Mixed signals always produce delays. The way out is not belief, it is neutrality. Neutrality does not demand, it does not withhold, it allows the system to remain open while unfinished. This feels risky to the mind, because the mind wants guarantees, but guarantees belong to completed systems. Formation asks for tolerance. Doubt refuses tolerance. It wants resolution. This is why doubt collapses waves, not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. The system does not collapse because you questioned it. It collapses because you demanded an answer. Questioning can coexist with openness. Demand cannot. Once you see this clearly, doubt loses its authority. You stop trying to eliminate it. You simply stop obeying it. You recognize it as an instruction you do not have to issue. You allow uncertainty to remain active. And in that allowance, movement resumes, not instantly, but cleanly. Doubt fades when it no longer controls the signal. The system does not need your permission to exist. It needs your non-interference to complete. And that is the quiet shift. Not more faith, not more effort, just the removal of a condition that never belonged there in the first place. When doubt releases its grip, the system does not celebrate. It simply continues, as it always would have. Checking results is the most common way people destroy a system without realizing it. Not by force, not by negativity, but by changing roles at the wrong moment. Each time you check, something subtle happens. You step out of the field, and you step into judgment. You are no longer the one holding coherence. You become the one evaluating reality. This shift is quiet, almost invisible, but the system feels it immediately. When you hold the field, you participate from within. You are inside the process. Your presence stabilizes it. When you check results, you move outside. You look at the process as an object. You ask it to justify itself. This is not awareness. This is inspection. Inspection changes the relationship. The moment you inspect, you imply doubt. Even if you do not feel emotional doubt, You imply that the system must earn the right to continue, and systems respond to implication more than intention. The system does not argue with you. It does not explain. It simply adjusts. It reduces expression. It becomes cautious because the signal it receives is clear. If you are not trusted yet, slow down. This is not punishment. It is alignment. You changed your position, so the system changed its behavior. When you hold the field, your role is generative. You allow things to organize without interference. When you check, your role becomes authoritative. You become the judge of whether reality is acceptable. Judgment collapses, openness, not morally, mechanically. A system cannot both express freely and be evaluated at the same time. Expression requires allowance. Evaluation requires containment. So the system chooses containment. This is why checking feels like slowing. Not because the system is weak, but because it is responding correctly. You may believe you are staying engaged, but engagement from outside is control. Engagement from inside is resonance. Most people confuse these two. They think attention is always helpful, but attention with authority suppresses emergence. When you check results, you are no longer aligned with the timing of formation. You are aligned with outcome. Outcome belongs to a later phase. By checking too early, you pull outcome into the present. The system cannot comply without compressing itself. So it pulls, it holds back expression. It waits for your signal to change. This is why checking becomes addictive. You feel something is wrong, so you check. The system slows, so you check again. Each check confirms your fear. Each confirmation increases interference. The loop tightens, and you assume the system is failing. But the failure is positional. You stepped into the wrong role. The role of judge is not compatible with formation. Judges demand clarity. Formation requires ambiguity. Judges ask for proof. Formation needs space. These roles cannot coexist. The system does not collapse because you are skeptical. It collapses because skepticism carries authority. It says, show me or stop. And the system listens. This is why checking results feels heavy. You are carrying responsibility that does not belong to you at this stage. You are trying to manage something that can only complete itself when unmanaged. This feels counterintuitive. The mind believes supervision creates safety, but supervision during formation creates fragility. The system must now perform. Performance is not emergence. Performance is reduction. So the system reduces itself to what it can safely show. Everything else withdraws. This withdrawal feels like nothing is happening, but something is happening. The system is protecting itself from premature exposure. When you stop checking, the opposite happens. The system relaxes. Signals align again. Movement resumes. Not because you finally trusted enough, but because you returned to the correct role. You stepped back into the field. You stopped judging. You allowed. This allowance is not passive. It is precise. It is the choice to not interfere with timing. Many people think holding the field means believing hard. It does not. It means not interrupting. It means allowing the process to remain unfinished without demanding reassurance. Checking is reassurance seeking. Reassurance seeking is a sign that you have left the field. The system does not need reassurance. It needs consistency. Consistency of position. Consistency of signal. When you hold the field, your signal is steady. When you check, your signal oscillates. Oscillation creates noise. Noise slows formation. This is why checking is the most common form of sabotage. It feels responsible. It feels smart. It feels necessary. But it is none of those things at the wrong phase. The system does not stop because you are wrong. It stops because you moved. You moved from participant to evaluator. And evaluation closes what participation opens. Once you see this clearly, behavior changes without effort. You stop checking, not because you force yourself, but because you understand the cost. You see that each check is not harmless. It is an instruction, and the instruction says pause until certainty. The system obeys. When you stop issuing that instruction, the system resumes. Quietly, naturally, without drama. The field does not need supervision. It needs continuity. Your role is not to verify reality. Your role is to stay positioned correctly within it. Hold the field. Do not inspect it. The moment you stop checking, you return to coherence. And coherence is where systems finish what they started. The freeze always happens at the same place. Not at the beginning, not at the end. Right in the middle. The launch is strong. Momentum builds fast. Signals align almost immediately. Then everything slows. Not gradually, abruptly. It feels like hitting an invisible wall. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They assume energy ran out. That discipline faded. That focus weakened. But none of that is true. The system did not lose power. It entered its most sensitive phase. The middle of any transformation is not a bridge. It is a chamber where structure is forming but not yet visible. This phase requires silence, not physical silence, structural silence, no demands, no evaluation, no verification. And this is exactly when most people intervene, because this is when uncertainty peaks. The beginning feels exciting. The end feels rewarding. The middle feels empty. There are no signs to track, no feedback to measure. So attention tightens. You start checking, not because you doubt the process, but because you want reassurance. That reassurance is the interference. You interrupt the moment the system needs to remain undisturbed. This is why 50% feels cursed. It is not cursed. It is exposed. The halfway point is when the system is no longer being initiated, but not yet being expressed. It is reorganizing itself internally. Any observation at this stage alters the structure being formed. So the system freezes, not to stop you, to protect itself. A system under formation cannot respond to scrutiny. It must choose between completing itself or answering questions. It cannot do both. So it pauses completion. The pause is mistaken for failure. In response, people push harder. They apply more effort, more focus, more checking. This compounds the freeze. What started as a natural silence becomes a prolonged stall. Not because the system failed, but because it is being constantly interrupted. The irony is painful. The closer you are to completion, the more dangerous attention becomes. Early stages tolerate noise. Late stages can handle evaluation. The middle cannot. This is where coherence is fragile. Fragile does not mean weak. It means sensitive to input. At 50%, the system is listening closely, not to your desire, to your posture. If your posture says wait and allow, it continues. If your posture says explain yourself, it locks. This is why so many people repeat the same pattern. They start strong. They feel aligned. They sense movement. Then nothing. They believe they need to restart. So they do, and the cycle repeats. They never let a process cross the silent middle, because the silence triggers interference. The mind cannot tolerate not knowing. So it interferes. It asks for signs. It checks results. It evaluates progress. Every one of these actions sends the same signal. Resolve now. The system cannot comply, so it freezes. Not because it is incomplete, but because it is mid-formation. Think of it like a bridge under construction. At 50%, it looks unusable. You cannot cross it. You cannot test it. Any attempt to load it before completion damages the structure. So the builders stop everything when interference appears, not because they are failing, but because the conditions are no longer safe. The system does the same. It waits until interference stops. This waiting feels like nothing is happening, but something is happening. Stability is being protected. When you step back, the system resumes, not immediately, but smoothly. This is why some shifts seem to happen overnight. They did not happen overnight. They completed quietly after interference ended. The freeze at 50% is not a test of faith. It is a test of restraint. Can you allow a process to be unfinished without demanding proof? Most people cannot. They believe progress must always be visible. But visibility belongs to outcomes, not to formation. The middle requires trust without confirmation, not belief, not hope, just non-interference. The moment you stop intervening, the freeze begins to thaw. The system recognizes the absence of pressure. It returns to internal alignment. Movement resumes, often faster than expected, because the work was never stopped. It was only paused by your attention landing at the wrong time. Once you understand this, the 50% freeze loses its mystery. It becomes predictable, and what is predictable can be avoided. You stop touching the process at the point where silence is required. You let the middle remain quiet. You resist the urge to check. You allow the chamber to do its work. This is not doing nothing. It is doing the one thing that matters, not interfering when coherence is forming. The middle is not where effort is needed. It is where restraint is required. And restraint is the skill most people never learn. They think power is action, but in complex systems, power is knowing when to stop acting. 50% freezes because that is where silence is essential. Break the silence and the system locks. Respect it and completion follows. Not slowly, cleanly, naturally, without force. The freeze was never a wall. It was a signal, and now you know how to read it. The system does not need your help. This sentence feels wrong to most people because you were trained to believe that progress requires effort. That stability requires management. That outcomes require constant input. But once a process has been initiated correctly, help becomes interference. Not all help. This kind of help, the help that rushes in after activation, the help that touches what is already moving, the help that assumes something must be adjusted. The system hears that assumption and it responds by slowing down. You do not need to do more. You do not need to think harder. You do not need to raise emotion or intensity. These instincts come from a misunderstanding of how self-organizing systems work. Once the signal is coherent, the system takes over. Your role is finished at that point. Most people struggle here because doing nothing feels irresponsible. Silence feels like abandonment. Restraint feels like weakness. But restraint is precision. The most damaging belief is that progress requires constant engagement. This belief turns awareness into manipulation. You check, you adjust, you correct. Not because something is wrong, but because you are afraid to let it run without supervision. This fear is subtle. It hides behind motivation. You say you care. You say you are staying aligned, but alignment does not hover. Alignment initiates, then it releases. The moment you keep touching a running system, you introduce noise. The system does not collapse loudly. It reorganizes around your interference. It becomes cautious. It narrows options. It slows expression, not because it needs help, because it is compensating for excess input. A self-organizing system already contains its own intelligence. It knows how to sequence steps. It knows when to pause. It knows how to resolve tension. When you intervene, you override that intelligence. Not intentionally, but structurally, you insert your timing into a process that already has timing. This creates conflict, and conflict produces delay. People often ask what they should do next. The answer is almost always less than they expect. Do not do more. Do not amplify. Do not push. Do not touch what is already moving. Touching feels productive, but it disrupts internal coordination. Think of it like a flight already in the air. Once it has taken off, you do not adjust the wings by hand. You trust the system to fly. Intervening mid-flight does not improve stability. It creates danger. The same logic applies here. Initiation is your responsibility. Completion is not. Completion belongs to the system. Your involvement beyond initiation must be passive. Not passive as in careless. Passive as in non-interfering. This requires discipline. not the discipline to act, the discipline to refrain. Most people never learn this. They are rewarded for effort. They are praised for control. So when silence appears, they panic. They mistake silence for stagnation. But silence is where integration happens. The system organizes beneath visibility. It does not announce its progress. It does not reassure. It works quietly. Your job is to not interrupt that work. This feels uncomfortable because the mind wants evidence. Evidence provides relief. But relief is not required for completion. Relief is required for comfort. Comfort and completion are not the same thing. If you keep seeking comfort through checking, you trade completion for reassurance. The system responds by reducing complexity. It chooses the safest path. That path rarely includes expansion. This is why so many people plateau. Not because they lack capacity, because they keep helping after help is no longer needed. They water a plant that is already saturated. They adjust a mechanism that is already calibrated. They correct a process that is already aligned. Every correction introduces deviation. The system must compensate. Compensation slows everything. When you stop helping, something surprising happens. The system accelerates, not dramatically, cleanly. Movement resumes because interference stops. This feels like magic to those who do not understand it, but it is mechanics. Self-organizing systems perform best when left alone after activation. Your presence matters at the beginning. Your restraint matters in the middle. Your recognition matters at the end. Everything else is noise. This does not mean disengagement. It means holding a steady position, no leaning in, no pulling back, just consistency. Consistency is not repetition. It is known contradiction. Every time you interfere, you contradict the original signal. You say go, then you say wait, then you say prove it. The system hears all of it and it pauses. When you stop interfering, the message becomes singular. Continue. That is all the system needs. Not encouragement, not monitoring, not emotional charge, just uninterrupted continuation. This is why the instruction is so simple. Do not touch what is already moving. Let the system do what it was designed to do. Trust here is not belief. Trust is known intervention. You do not have to feel confident. You do not have to feel calm. You only have to stop interfering. The system does not care how you feel. It cares about signal integrity. Interference corrupts signal. Silence preserves it. Once you understand this, effort transforms. You stop trying to help. You stop trying to fix. You allow. Allowing is not passive surrender. It is active restraint. It is knowing when your role has ended. Most people never leave the stage. They keep adjusting the performance, and the performance never finishes. Completion requires absence. Absence of judgment, absence of supervision, absence of help. The system does not need you once it is running. It needs your non-interference. That is not weakness. That is mastery. When you stop touching the process, you finally let it complete itself. And when it completes, it does so without strain, without force, without delay, because it was never broken. It was only waiting for you to step back. Silence is not stagnation. Slowness is not failure. These two ideas free more people than effort ever will. Most suffering begins when silence is misread. When nothing seems to move and the mind fills the gap with meaning. Something is wrong. Something stopped. Something was lost. But silence is not absence. It is insulation. It is the space where structure can form without disturbance. When a system enters silence, it is not shutting down. It is sealing itself off from noise. Noise does not always come from the outside. Most noise comes from inside you. Expectation, comparison, urgency. Silence removes these inputs. It creates a controlled environment where reorganization can occur without interference. This is why silence feels uncomfortable. It takes away feedback. And without feedback, the mind feels unsafe. The mind wants signs. It wants reassurance. It wants movement. It can recognize but formation does not announce itself. It happens beneath perception. This is why slowness is misunderstood. Slowness feels like falling behind, but in reality, it is often the opposite. It means the system has entered a phase that cannot be rushed, a phase where speed would destroy integrity. You are not being delayed. You are being protected. Protected from premature exposure, protected from collapse. When you are isolated from noise, it can feel like abandonment. No confirmation, no validation, no response. But isolation is not rejection. It is containment. The system pulls you into a quieter lane so it can finish its work. This does not feel like progress. It feels like suspension. But suspension is a form of precision. Think of it as quarantine. Not because something is wrong, but because something delicate is happening. The system isolates itself so that outside input cannot distort internal alignment. This is what happens right before breakthroughs. Not excitement, not acceleration, silence. The absence of signals is the signal. The absence of movement is movement happening at a level you cannot see. Most people interrupt this stage. They panic. They try to restart momentum. They inject effort. And by doing so, they break the isolation. Noise returns. The system must begin protecting itself again. This creates cycles of almost there, almost complete, almost resolved. The breakthrough never arrives because the silence is never respected. Silence is not waiting, it is working. Slowness is not hesitation, it is calibration. The system is adjusting internal parameters so that what emerges can sustain itself. Anything that emerges too fast collapses just as quickly. What takes time integrates. This is why the most stable shifts are often preceded by emptiness, a lack of direction, a lack of feedback, a sense of being nowhere. Nowhere is not a dead end. It is neutral ground, a place free from old signals and new demands. In this space, the system is no longer reacting. It is reorganizing. You are not being ignored. You are being shielded. Shielded from the urge to interfere. Shielded from the temptation to force clarity. The quiet you are in is not a void. It is a chamber designed to block noise while new coherence forms. Once you understand this, the fear lifts. You stop trying to escape silence. You stop trying to fill it. You allow it. Allowing silence feels passive, but it is an active choice. It is the decision to not contaminate a sensitive phase. The system does not need encouragement here. It needs insulation. It needs you to stay out of the way. This is the breakthrough. Not a dramatic insight, not a rush of emotion, just a clean reframe. Silence is not absence of progress. It is the condition progress requires. Slowness is not punishment. It is protection. You are not being left behind. You are being held in a quieter layer where noise cannot reach. This is why people often say things shifted right after they stopped trying. They did not stop caring. They stopped interrupting. They let the silence do its job. When the system is ready, movement returns. Not forced, not frantic. Clear, integrated, stable. The breakthrough is not something you create. It is something you stop preventing. By respecting silence, by trusting slowness, by understanding that isolation is not abandonment, it is preparation. Once this clicks, urgency dissolves. You no longer chase movement. You wait without tension. And when movement comes, it holds because it was formed in quiet, without interference, without noise, without collapse. This is the intelligence of silence. And now you know how to stand inside it without fear. The system did not fail. It never collapsed on its own. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Nothing needed fixing. The interruption came from the outside. Quiet, unnoticed, well-intentioned. That is why it was so effective. Most breakdowns do not arrive as chaos. They arrive as care applied at the wrong moment. You were not sabotaging yourself. You were stepping in too early. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Organize, stabilize, integrate, but integration requires continuity. Every interruption resets continuity, not fully, just enough to delay completion. This is why it always felt like you were close. Because you were close does not mean finished. Close means sensitive. Sensitive systems cannot tolerate supervision. They require space. The moment you understand this, blame dissolves. There is no failure to analyze, no mistake to correct, no flaw to overcome, only a position to release. You step back, the system steps forward. You stop checking, the system resumes. This is not belief. It is mechanics. Awareness does not chase outcomes. It waits. Waiting is not passive. Waiting is stable. Interference is restless. It needs feedback. It needs proof. It needs reassurance. Awareness does not. Awareness knows that what is forming does not need to be watched to exist. This is the final distinction, not between effort and surrender, but between patience and pressure. Pressure interrupts. Patience completes. Most people think awareness means constant attention, but constant attention is surveillance. Surveillance changes behavior. The system reacts to being watched by becoming careful. Careful systems move slowly, not because they are weak, but because they are protecting coherence. When you remove surveillance, coherence flows again. This is why progress often arrives when you stop looking for it. Not because you stopped wanting it, but because you stopped interfering with it. There is nothing mystical here. A process cannot both complete and justify itself at the same time. When you demand justification, completion pauses. When you allow completion, justification becomes unnecessary. This is the quiet law underneath everything you experienced. You did not need more faith. You did not need more discipline. You did not need more intensity. You needed fewer interruptions. Once this lands, urgency fades. You no longer feel the need to monitor. You no longer feel responsible for outcomes. Responsibility shifts from managing results to maintaining position. The correct position is simple: inside the field, not above it, not outside it. Inside means participation without evaluation. Inside means presence without demand. Outside means checking, judging, measuring. Outside slows everything. Inside allows completion. This is why the final instruction is so clean. Do not add anything. Do not remove anything. Just stop interrupting. The system knows how to finish. It always did. Every time you felt stuck, something was actually stabilizing. Every time you felt delayed, something was being protected. Every time nothing happened, something was aligning beneath visibility. The absence of movement was not emptiness. It was containment. Containment is where durable outcomes are built. Fast results impress the mind. Integrated results last. The system always chooses what lasts, unless you force it to rush. When you stop forcing, it returns to its natural rhythm. That rhythm is quiet. That quiet feels like waiting. But waiting is not inactivity. It is readiness without pressure. This is where awareness lives. Awareness does not lean forward. It does not pull back. It stays centered. Centered awareness does not ask for signs. It recognizes coherence without proof. Interference always asks, is it working? Is it there yet? Did I do it right? Awareness waits. That waiting is not doubt. It is confidence without noise. Once you embody this, you no longer fear silence. You recognize it as the signal that formation is underway. You stop filling space. You stop checking progress. You stop interrupting what you already set in motion. The ending does not need to be dramatic. It does not need a call. It does not need instruction. Only a residue, a sentence that stays after everything else fades. The system did not fail. You interrupted it. Awareness waits. Interference checks. Nothing more needs to be said. Because once this is seen, it cannot be unseen. And once you stop interrupting, the system finishes quietly, completely on its own time.